Right, so we've come back to the Waveney again today, sort of part two of our little Waveney adventure. Last week we fished the other end of town on the normal match stretch, and despite the 150 flood warnings across the country, we decided to pole fish, which wasn't the cleverest thing to do, but we still caught plenty of skimmers and one or two bream and had a really lovely day. So while the river's still holding a lot of colour, I thought I'd bring you to the other end of town on another free stretch, and we'll go about doing the same sort of thing, feeder fishing. So hopefully today I can run through quite a few different methods, because we should get a split tide today. So the similar conditions to what we were faced with last time, where all the flood water from upstream is pushing through the same way as the flow when we start. So we'll need to fish traditional river style, rod in the air, quite a bit of lead on, looking for drop back bites. When the tide turns and starts going the other way, you've got the flood water pushing against the tide trying to come up, which I think will slow it right down almost to a standstill, and we'll have almost still water conditions. So I've made up two rods, one how I'd normally set up for a still water, one how I'd set up for a river, and then hopefully that'll see us through the day, just fishing down one line, down the same hole all day, but in two different styles. And as the flow changes throughout the day, we'll use different weights of feeder and different approaches to get the same result, hopefully, and a few skimmers in the net. But as you can see, we're on a big sweeping bend, so the tide is pushing from left to right today, and you've got quite a bit of flood water coming from above. The river's in the fields on all the sections upstream of this. So what it does, when it comes around this sweeping bend, it'll push most of the flow on our side. So although the river's quite flat, I think where the skimmers will be a little bit further across, just trying to get out of that main body of water. So we're going to fish 20 metres today, which puts us about 3/4 of the way across the river. But by having the rod up in the air over the top of that faster water that's coming through under our feet, we should still be able to get nice presentation and be able to fish in a nice way. When the tide turns, again, the flow's going to be more on this side, but hopefully I think the flood water will slow that up, so it'll let me show you two different styles of presentation. So the ground bait we've gone for today, because of the coloured water, is a natural coloured ground bait. I don't really want to use a dark ground bait in coloured water, but if it was clearer and I still felt there was a chance of a bream or a skimmer, I'd just simply use the same ground bait, just the dark version of it. But we've got 2 pints of sweet skimmer, sort of a biscuit based ground bait that provides like the main body of the mix. I'd use that on its own, but I still want the bait to eject out the feeder quickly, so I might fish it a little bit stodgy. I might put a lot of worms through that will sort of clag the ground bait up a little bit, and I still want it to eject, and sweet skimmer on its own will be a little bit too stiff for that, so I've put a pint of natural F1 with that, just to give it that spongy sort of soft nature that will make sure the bait will eject out of the feeder. So I can mix the ground bait exactly how I want for the flow and the fast conditions, but it will still come out of the feeder every time if I get a fast bite, or if I want to put bait in at the start. I want it to come out quickly. I don't want it to be a really stodgy inert ground bait on the bottom. So I've got 2 pints of sweet skimmer, 1 pint of F1, and then just a little bit of the salted caramel bait booster in the water, just to give it that lovely sweet brasamy smell that the sweet skimmer's got as well. And I feel like a liquid in the ground bait always leaches out a little bit more. So on a river situation, it's ideal because it's going further downstream. You'll see I'll use a cage feeder. A few bits of that will break off on the way down and go a bit further downstream, almost like when you put bait in on the pole and you loose feed over the top, you're trying to draw fish up to that main body of bait. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with the feeder. So you can see there I've got just my neat ground bait in one bowl altogether. And then I've got a little working bowl that I'm just going to do my initial feed out of. So I'll just put a little bit there, and then if I'm feeling my way through the session and I want to change it, I can bin that bit, start again. I can change the mix as I go along, rather than putting bait in the main amount of mix. So I'm going to put a few feederfuls in at first. I'm just going to fish down one hole today. We're not going to do a big bait up and then fish somewhere else and wait for it to settle. We're just going to try and put a little bit of bait in, and then feel our way into the swim, and hopefully catch a few skimmers. We've not got an awful lot of room, and although you could probably combine it with like fishing a pole or something like that if you were in a match, today we're just going to go for a bold approach and just fish with the skimmers. Looks like a perfect day for them with a bit of colour, so hopefully it'll work quite well. So to start off with, I'm just going to add a few casters, just a really small amount of maggots as well, and then a little tiny bit of finely chopped worms. So we've got sort of like not a really rich mix, but enough bait there to get a few fish interested, and then we can sort of feel our way in. I don't want to go too gung-ho with the worms at first until I'm fairly sure there's a few fish there, and then I can increase that as I go along. But I'm guessing with the colour in the water and the fact that a lot of the fish will be relying on smell and scent and things like that, that worms will be a great bait today. So I'll put a little bit in the initial feed and just see how we go. And then most of the fishing, certainly at first, will be with a normal cage feeder. So I'll probably fish with a 4 or 5 square cage feeder. But just to bait up, I'm just going to start on a great big 7 square. I'm going to put half a dozen of those in first of all, and then revert down to a 5 square, feel the way in, and if there's a lot of fish there, I might drop it down inside so I'm not getting line bites and things like that. But I'll put this on, put half a dozen of those in, and then see how we get on. So I've just baited up, I've put in half a dozen 7 square feeders at 20 metres, and I'm able just to do that with my normal fishing rod. I've not had to set a bait up rod or anything like that. It's only a 20 metre cast. And I'm going to start off on my traditional river rig, which is like the twizzled loop. I'll go into that in a bit more detail in a little while. 5 square cage feeder, 70 centimetre tail at first. If there's quite a lot of fish there, I'll probably drop to a slightly shorter tail. But just to get an idea of what's happening, I'll start on 70 centimetres. It's not too bad when you've got a bit of flow because everything's always straight and things like that. So I'm not too worried about missing bites. I just want to catch a fish or two and feel my way in at first. So just going to put a little blob of worms in. Same mix what I did the initial feed with, just a few casters and the very odd maggot. And I'm sort of tidying up the feeder a little bit, but still leaving it a little bit rough. I'm still trying to draw in more fish from downstream. And same as what we did on the other river videos, I'm trying to hit the clip with the rod vertically until the feeder hits the bottom there. So you can see there I've got a good 3 foot of line to make the bow as I put the rod into the rest. So you can see there the tip's now tightening up. So we've got the rod elevated, so the fastest water is under my feet here, so we're going over the top of that. And you can see there there's still quite a bit of pace on it. Just face the rod downstream a little bit to take a lot of the pressure off that tip. But that way I can get away with like 1.5 ounce tip. Still fish with a reasonable amount of delicacy. But with that, the way we've got that rig set up, I just need like a small movement to get that drop back bite to hook the fish. So we'll have fairly regular casts at first, just to try and get a bit of bait in the peg and feel our way in, and then we'll wait to see what sort of response we get before we start going too mad with the feed or changing anything too much. So bait for today's session, there's sort of simplicity itself. I've brought standard bream fare, got a few worms to chop up, little handful of red worms just for the hook, a handful of red maggots just to tip off the hook bait or as a change hook bait, and then a few lovely casters that, believe it or not, my wife has managed to turn for me while I've been away. So I've been away all weekend, and she's done a nice job, to be fair, which is quite an achievement in itself, because although my 5-year-old daughter loves playing with maggots, my wife not so. So I've got a few of those as well to feed. It's not going to be too roachy here, so I'm not too worried about putting casters in from the start. So I'll do a mixture of those and worms. Start on maggot hook bait just as a standout bait, and then I'm expecting to change over to worms if a few fish are in the peg. But the only other bait I've brought with me, if it was exceptionally coloured, I brought a little bit of corn just as a bit of a change bait, or if I'm getting bitted out by roach, but I don't expect to use that at all, so that stayed in the bag for now. I'm just putting a little bit of everything in at first. So just hitting the bottom well up from the rod rest. So you've got that nice amount of bow to get that tip to settle nice. If we were straight to the feeder and tightened up to the feeder too quickly, you'd need a lot more lead to hold bottom. And it's ripping through quite quickly today. So we've got, you can see there then, I just tightened up a little bit more than last chuck, and the feeder just tripped along the bottom, and I've got 50 grams on there already. So I'm expecting the tide to start easing up a little bit soon, and we'd drop down from 50 to 40, maybe even 30 grams. But at the minute I want the feeder to go in and fish quite securely. So hopefully if it stays put, that'll be the weight that we settle on. If I need any more than that, I can just trim that up a little bit with some little strips of lead as well through the cage of the feeder. But it seems to be sitting there quite nicely at the minute. So just cast fairly regularly at first, sort of 2 to 3 minutes, just get a little bit of bait in, try and get sort of signs that there's a fish there, you know, maybe like a line bite or a positive indication, and just feel our way in. Hook wise, I've got a N30 size 14 to start off with, quite a big hook, but I anticipate fishing a reasonable sized bait in the coloured water, so sort of treble maggot, worm and maggot, bunch of red worms, that sort of thing. So I've got a reasonable sized hook on. Now normally for most of my bream fishing I'd use an N20, but because the water's pulling through quite quick, we're going to have to bring the fish up against the flow, so I've just gone for a slightly stronger turned in hook pattern, because when I hook a bream I anticipate it to kite downstream quite a bit, and then we're going to have to bring it up through this fast water under our feet. So, oh, there's a bite, right on cue. Feels like a reasonable fish. Just got £6 feeder mono on the reel today. Because we're only fishing 20 metres, I don't feel the necessity, even when the tide drops off, to fish braid today. And because these fish are quite big and fighting quite well in the flow, I'm just glad of that extra insurance of the mono. The other thing as well is I don't want a shock leader in these situations either, because you've got a lot of flood water coming down from upstream. You've also got quite a bit of debris and weed coming down from upstream as well. So if you had a shock leader, you could end up with a lot of weed going into the knot of the tip ring. So actually a chub. Bob's excited. Thanks, Bob. That's not a bad start on our skimmer fishing session. That's a nice bonus fish to start off with. Chub are quite an inquisitive fish and often first on the scene when you put a little bit of bait in, so good start. Just had a little bit of a line bite there, sort of tip just went down and then just dislodged the feeder very slightly there. If a big number of fish move in, I'll often overweight the feeder quite considerably, so a line bite won't dislodge it and drop the feeder downstream out of the way of the fish. So I'll often like anchor it in, so only a positive registration will give you a drop back. But at the minute we're just sort of feeling our way in. I'm expecting the tide to sort of start easing up a little bit soon, so although every now and again our 50 gram feeder's just moving through, I'm quite happy that it's sitting there long enough to catch a skimmer. So the best way to know that if your feeder's too light is if you get a sort of almost like a rhythmic movement on the tip, that feeder's bumping along the bottom, and you know that you're going to need a little bit more lead to hold bottom. So always for skimmer and bream fishing, you're always better off fishing a little bit too heavy than a little bit too light. Other fish like chub, roach, barbel, sometimes like just inching it through the peg can be a really good method. You know, fish with a feeder that's only just holds, and every now and again you can pull the line and just inch the feeder down the peg. But for bream and skimmers, usually they're just like a nice static bait. So it's encouraging though that we've just had that little line bite, because I reckon that was a bream or a skimmer. So I'm just going to leave it for a minute, just so I don't disturb anything, and then and I'm going to come out and refeed again and go in again. Might put quite a big bit of worm on as well, just see if like they're coming to a bit more smell with that colour in the water. But I'd imagine that a lot of the bream will be downstream here, where all of these boat dikes and all of that lot, where the river widens out a little bit, and hopefully if our regular casting will just draw a few fish up. There's a little bed of bait there, and hopefully that will draw a few fish up to where we want to fish. Incredible really that we're in the same town as where we fished before, and we had all the hustle and bustle of the motorway, and you know the busy pegs that are turned into like the second muddiest place in the world. Not quite as muddy as the River Wye, but second muddiest place in the world. And here we are, the other end of town. All we can hear is the birds singing, and it's lovely. So no indication there, just for a little bit. So I'm just going to ease that feeder out of the peg and refeed again. You can see there on the line there's a little bit of debris. I'm just going to drop that right down to the feeder. Just pull that off the line each time. You can see if I was fishing a shock leader there, that would jam into the tip ring and give us a few problems if we were catching a few fish. But just by fishing straight through, you don't get that sort of problem. So I just changed my treble maggot for a reasonable sized bit of Dendra. Just tip that off with a red maggot just for a bit of visibility. Snip the head off the worm. And then just the very end of the tail, just to stop it looping back over the point of the hook. Seems to be with all worms, whether it's a red worm or a Dendrobina, if you just nip the end of that tail off, just stops it looping back over the hook and losing a fish where you know, just mask the hook point a little bit. So make sure I give myself plenty of room for that bow in the line, otherwise we definitely wouldn't hold bottom. Quite a strong downstream wind as well, which might mean we need a little bit of extra lead on the feeder as well. So it's just about holding though, so we're just about getting away with it at the minute. So here we go. Let's see what this one is. I'd like to say it was a skimmer, but after the surprise chub on the first cast, we'll have to see. Whatever it is putting up quite a good scrap. I think it could be another chub. Just a little tiny indication before I got the sort of that positive drop back bite. Oh no, it's a skimmer. Shows you what I know. Really is making these fish fight hard in this all this extra flow. Just had that bite just as that boat went over the top. Reasonable depth of water there, so Bob's getting excited. Thanks, Bob. Nice fish, but you can see what I mean about choosing a N30 hook instead of an N20. You really have got to pull those fish back against the flow. It really is sort of fighting quite hard in the edge. So nice start. Thanks very much, Bob. Blown the worm right up the line there. So we're still just about holding with that 50 gram feeder at the minute. Just got a normal 11-foot Superior X. Because it's not a very big cast, sort of any normal medium feeder would do here, sort of 10, 11, 12-foot feeder. You still have a nice day's fishing. Don't need anything too powerful because it's quite a gentle cast, and although I've got quite a bit of lead on today, you can still do it with a nice gentle cast. So I've got two 11-footers set up for today. I've got one with an 1.5 ounce tip in, which is like my traditional river rig for fishing as we are now, with the rod up in the air looking for a drop back bite. Another tiny little indication there. Just going to ignore all of that and just wait for a positive drop back. And then the other one is identical rod, just with a 3/4 ounce tip in and a normal sliding paternoster, just like what I'd fish in a still water. Because what I envisage is although it's pulling through really fast at the minute, when that tide turns and tries to go that way with the amount of floodwater that's coming down, I think we're going to get still water conditions. So as a result, we're going to have to fish it like a still water with the rod down low and fish with a sliding paternoster to get a better indication with a softer tipped rod. So I've set both up today, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, the only other option that it might have is if the floodwater is that strong, it could carry on flowing the same way all day, and it could overpower the tide trying to come up against it. But by setting both up, we're covered for every eventuality. But now that we've got one, hopefully that's a good sign of things to come, and we're gonna get a few bites again. But really did scrap well. But like I say, that you can imagine this flow's coming around on this big sweeping bend where we're on, and the flow under our feet is sort of almost half as fast again as where we're fishing over there. So you've got to have a reasonably strong kit to bring the fish up against the flow. But with this coloured water, you can get away with quite heavy kit. I mean, I wouldn't even have any problems putting on a size 12 or even a 10 hook if we can get away with a big enough hook bait. So we'll see how that goes and feel our way in from there. So that flow's just starting to ease up a little bit now. Still going through quite quickly, but it's just starting to ease up a little bit, and just got a feeling that there might be a few fish starting to get in the peg. So I've changed from putting the bait in the mix and feeding just a little bit of bait each cast to doing a pick and mix tub of virtually neat bait, which I'm scooping the feeder through and just plugging the ends. So we're getting a lot more particles in. So I'm hoping that way I can get quite a bit of bait into the peg before what I think is going to be the prime time for a skimmer or a bream, to give myself a good chance of catching a fish or two. So I'm just getting the odd indication every now and again. There's not too many fish there yet, but I don't think it's going to be too long before we start catching a few. I think this pace is just a little bit too much for them at the minute, especially with the odd bit of weed and stuff like that coming through as well. Oh, there we go, right on cue. Like I say, just as it eases off a little bit, I think that's going to be prime feeding spell. So just by being a little bit more positive with the feed, just for a few casts, I'm going to have a reasonable bed of bait on the bottom by the time they really start to feed. You see there, that pace has dropped off quite a bit. That fish hasn't got anywhere near as far downstream as the other one. Like I say, still a really nice fish. Bob wants to say hello again. There we go. A couple of pound or so. Perfect condition, these ones. Thanks, Bob. Give him a kiss. That was on 3 maggots that time. Fluoro maggot is often quite a good bait in these coloured conditions, so I'm putting on 2 reds and just tipping it with a fluoro. Whether it's a visibility thing or whatever, I don't know. But as you can see there, I'm sort of filling the feeder virtually full of bait and then just packing the ends a little bit just to maximise the amount of feed that's going into the peg now. Once I feel like there's quite a few fish there, or if I end up getting quite a few line bites and whatever, so indication straight away, I'll probably revert back to feeding it how I did, with like a little thumbnail of worm and a few casters in my mix there, and just refine it down just so as we're getting a positive indication rather than any line bites. But like I say, I'll just persevere with ploughing the bait in just for a little bit longer. Might shorten that hook length up just a little bit if we end up getting more indications and less positive bites. Thing is, in that coloured water, those fish might come right up to the feeder. So just give it a few more casts and keep going. At the minute, we're not sort of foul hooked any fish or had too many false indications, but that'll probably be my next move, is just shorten that hook length down by maybe another 10 centimetres. Just try and fish everything a little bit tighter to the feeder. Definitely more signs now, but I just feel like that pace is just dropping off very, very slightly. So although the stretch that we're on today is free fishing, it's only quite a short pound here. There's plenty more free fishing at the other end of town as well. But there's quite a few nice club stretches in the area as well. So there's a bit that will probably fish quite well today at Dunborough. This run by Bungay Cherry Tree Angling Club. They do yearly membership and day tickets. They've got quite a few lakes on their books as well. That's quite a nice club to join. They have quite a few friendly matches as well. And going downstream, you've got a free stretch at Whirlingham. That would be quite good for bream and skimmers under these conditions as well. And then another angling club below that called North Cove. So sort of sport for choice really here. And then below that you've got a few other stretches, and then the river runs into Alton Broad, sort of almost joins the sea. Alton Broad goes right to a sea wall. In fact, in the summer there's quite a few mullet in there that creep through the lock gates there, and then the river goes around in a great big loop before it joins up with the River Yare and floods out at Great Yarmouth. And again, there can be some good winter sport there on the very lower bits, but like many venues across the country, a lot of fish pack into these town stretches, whether it's just a bit more activity and a bit more warmer conditions for the fish, a bit of cover maybe from predation, but it does provide some excellent sport through the winter. And like I say, your sport for choice here really, because there's a lot of roach in here. Although we've got ideal conditions for bream today, if we weren't faced with those, we'd have good conditions for roach or perch or anything like that as well, both in the main river and then in the boat cutting what comes off it. There's even like a little channel out the end of that. This packs full of fish in the winter as well. So you know, even if you've only got a short spell to fish, it's just dead simple there. You can fish to hand with a short pole or a whip. There's quite a few bits that are free parking or very cheap parking as well. So great place to come pleasure fishing as well as fishing the match. So although we're getting a little bit of debris on the line that's coming down in the flood conditions, just pulling that off each time, we've not got too much on the hook, so the hook bait's staying fairly clear. But if I was faced with a situation where the hook bait's getting masked as well, an excellent little tip is to put like a number 8 stot or something like that, just 3 or 4 inches above the hook, And what happens, any debris that's coming down the line gets stopped by there, so it keeps your hook bait a bit clearer just for a little bit longer. Also steadies the bait presentation, so especially in flooded conditions, it's a great way to catch bream and skimmers in flooded conditions, just to solve the problem of any weed or stuff like that that's coming down the swim. But like I say, I don't think that'll be a problem for much longer. I think as soon as this tide eases off, a lot of that suspended rubbish will drop down and we'll be able to fish normally. And I think that'll be the key to when the fish start feeding properly as well. But been a good sign so far to catch the fish what we've caught already. But I think as soon as that tide starts to ease up just a little bit, I think it'll be lift off then. So brace yourself. So another one here. I shortened that hook length down to 60 centimetres and didn't have any indications at all, just the odd line bite. So I've just gone up to a metre tail, and this is first cast. So thanks Bob, giving me a bit of assistance with netting it. So you can see there I've gone to a much longer tail, and I've had that indication straight away. So whether the fish are just sitting downstream of the feed or not, I don't know, but it's interesting that I've just made that simple change and had a bite straight away. So get the impression there's a few fish there. There's still a bit of flow and a little bit more weed coming down at the minute, but starting to drop off slightly, but it's not dropped off quite as much as what I'd expect. The tide has dropped quite a bit. You can see there against the far bank reeds how much the tide's dropped already, but it's still pushing through, so there's obviously a lot of flood water coming down from above. But like I say, as soon as that pace just drops a tiny little bit, I think we'll be in for a good little spell. And that's the beauty of all of these tidal venues. You're never fishing almost the same swim for the full 5 hours. The tide is changing your peg, and the lines of the flow and where the fish sit and things like that really does make it a very interesting place to come and fish. But like I say, with that flow ripping through at the minute, whether those fish are just sitting a little bit further downstream or not, I don't know. But like I say, that longer tail first cast has produced another fish, so it shows the importance of just ringing the changes and swapping things around just as you go along. Still quite a bit of weed coming through with these flooded conditions. So I've just put another 10 grams of lead on, although the tide is very slightly starting to ease up a little bit. I've put another 10 grams of lead on because every now and again a little bit of weed will just hit the line and just inch that feeder through a little bit. So I've just anchored it with another 10 grams of lead, and I've just had another couple of signs that there's a few fish there. Like I say, I don't really think they want to feed while this stuff's coming through, but sort of there's ways to get round it and still get the odd fish. And with the size of fish what we've caught today, you know, you don't mind waiting a little while for a bite. It's ended up being quite a good session, but like I said, just by anchoring it with that extra 10 grams of lead should just give me a little bit more of a chance of an indication. And I've stodged the ground bait up a little bit more with a few extra worms. Like I say, I caught that skimmer with a longer tail, and I think the fish are hanging back down the peg a little bit, so by stodging the ground bait up a little bit, I think that'll just keep them in the peg just a little bit longer. Just keep mixing it up and just keep trying different things to see what you get the best response from. Like I say, I think as soon as that tide eases up a little bit, we'll naturally start catching more anyway, but it's whatever we can catch before that point will be a bonus. So you can see now the tide started to drop quite a bit and the pace has just started dropping off. I can drop that rod rest down a tiny little bit, and I'm now down to 10 grams lighter feeder. It's not dropped off as much as what I thought. There's obviously a lot more flood water still coming from upstream, and are still pushing it through, even though the tide should be going the other way by now. Got quite a strong downstream wind as well, which is sort of artificially still making it go through, but still catching a few fish. So nice sized fish when we get them as well. Thanks, Bob. This is a chunky one. It's almost feels like a roach bream hybrid. I think there's a little bit of roach about that. It's a really wide chunky fish, that one. But we've not had to switch over to our still water methods as yet, because like I said, the floodwater's still pushing it through like a river, but we can hold with a little bit less lead now and a little bit more refined conditions. But what a great fish. Not a bad fish to end the day on that one. The conditions have been a little bit testing when it was pushing through at its fastest, because we've had almost flooded river conditions with weed and stuff like that coming through at all levels. But we've still caught a few fish in it. The colours meant it's been an ideal day for catching bream, but this is also a great stretch for roach, a few chub, things like that as well. So if you come down here and the river's not holding as much colour as this, you just float fish, pole fish, whatever you want to do, and still get plenty of bites. So it really has been a nice day, and a nice way to finish our little two-part River Waveney adventure. So it's a river that I've been trying to get on for quite a while, but as you can see, us with matches on a Tuesday and Thursday, I sort of limited the days what we can come down here a little bit to try and coincide it with nice conditions for bream. But hopefully you've enjoyed it, picked up a few tips, and if you like what you see, don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in to the next one.